Hey everyone! In this video, I'll share hacks and tips for feeder fishing. Because it often happens that we go fishing, and either the fish aren't biting, or we get snagged, or we break off, or we can't cast far enough to the fishing spot. There are some tricks and manipulations with feeder rods for this, with feeder tackle, so that your fishing trips are always successful, and you come home with a catch and in a good mood. Today I'm going to tell you everything I know. Now let me give you a tip about. Let's start with fishing from 2 or 3 spots, beginning with 2. We're all used to how to fish. We anglers we choose a spot on the other bank. Well, let's say rent some kind of tree, a stump, a tray. It doesn't matter what. We clip it correctly and at a certain distance, and we catch from one spot. Friends, that's really great and good. But when you fish from 2 spots, it becomes even more effective. Sometimes it happens that we bait a spot, we fish, we cast feeders, and we get bites. Then, as I cut it, was it a predator that came? Maybe a pike or a zander? Coco, it doesn't matter what. She dispersed our roach, let's say. Well, the fish left. We have to wait for a bite. 10, 15, 20 minutes, right? Or the fish got overfed. I'm tired of the spots. I need to take a break. We caught active fish with our feeders, but then they got spooked. The most active, in short, swam away somewhere. I recommend that you set up a second spot. So we have 1 clip already. We've clipped our line. This is our distance. Fishing, yes. What are we doing? I'm telling you everything now in full and in order. Let's imagine that we're working off the same reference point on the opposite shore. So we have some kind of clip. We cast and put the rod down. We cast to the clip. Our line is tight, right up to the clip. Let's imagine that we want to fish in the channel where it's deep and the dock is right on the edge. The distance here is about 20 meters. What are we doing? Guys, we don't have to remember the meters, centimeters, or how much line the reel pulls in with 1 turn. We're just doing it intuitively based on the turns. So what are we doing? We're counting the turns. Let's lift it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 turns of the reel. And we place the second clip right here. We have 1 clip, that's our maximum cast. And we place the second clip right next to it. Whoa! So we have 2 clips. Our first clip is for maximum ejection. The second clip, we know exactly 15 turns of the coil, and we feed the second point at 15 turns. Guys, this may be the same reference point for you in direction, the same tree. Let's say we throw there for maximum throw and we throw there 15 turns closer. We can move this point, which is closer. Here it turns out to be to our left, or B. You have the option to choose a different reference point along another diagonal, but there's an important point that I will definitely share with you. Let's imagine that this is the first casting point, and this is the second casting point, which is 15 turns shorter than this one. The main thing, friends, is to have a distance of at least 15-20 meters between the points. Why is it important to have a distance between the feeding spots, especially if they are different, at least 15 to 20 meters? When we're fishing in winter, and the fish are less active and not moving much. Friends, we keep the distance between the holes at 5 to 7 meters. The water is cold and the bait stays in place. When does the water start to warm up? It works differently with feed. The fish are much quicker. If we make 2 points next to each other, they will mix up. Plus, we won't be able to throw accurately if the distance is long. After all, the newbies will still have the place where the feeder falls smeared. And we will not make a spot like this behind the feed, but from 2 spots. 1 here, and there will be something like this, common to us. That is, there will be 15-10 meters, such a circle, and food will float everywhere, the fish will eat it everywhere. The fish won't find your bait, so make sure to keep the distance greater to prevent them from mixing together. And you caught different types of fish. This fish is at 1 spot and at the second one. Yes, you can make the distance between the points 10 meters. If you have a large difference in depth, because the distance will be large and the depth will be different, for example, 1 point, if there's a steep ledge, a really steep ledge up to 1 feeder, you can have 2 feeders here, either 10 meters apart or 5-7 meters. The depth down here will be different, so the difference will be completely different compared to being on a single feeding table. That's why you can allow yourself to do this. To illustrate, we are down in the channel. Here we have 1 feeding spot, our bait, and the second feeder. We have it somewhere right here at the very top. This difference of 10 meters will be significant because the depth is different and the fish won't swim from 1 spot to the other. Your bait won't mix at all, but if you create that difference right in front of you, it will be effective. Feeder 2, Everything will mix here, so when fishing from two different spots, I really recommend keeping a good distance between them to cover as much area as possible. I want to tell you about bait. This is a very important point. For those who don't know, beginners, friends, feeder bait is not just something you mix up and throw in. You need to make it special depending on what fish we're catching. If we're catching bream, we need to moisten the bait really well so that it doesn't create dust and lies on the bottom heavy and wet. If we're catching roach and bream, we prepare the bait. We add as little water as possible so that it stays dry, almost to the point of being slightly dried out. And at the moment when the feeder drops, it creates a cloud of dust. This layer of dust was there. So when you're preparing your bait, you need to know what kind of fish you're targeting. Because let's imagine a situation. We came to catch bream, and it feeds right on the bottom, while our bait is scattered in the water column. The fish simply won't settle on the spot if we're targeting roach, which usually bites almost as soon as our bait drops. What I will talk about next is that if the bait is on the bottom, roach won't bite as well as it could. So it's very important. Also, guys, it's very important that if you have leftover bait, for example, if you came for feeder fishing, yeah, something was biting, but there's still some bait left. How do I keep it? The only way I've found for myself, how to keep bait until the next fishing trip, which can last a week. And two, this is a freezing method. So the bait that we have left after fishing, we don't throw it away. We don't do anything with it. We take this bait home in a bag and put it in the freezer. It's in the freezer that it can be kept until the next fishing trip. I've tried drying it in the sun, making balls and drying it out, and it molds, rots, and stinks in different ways. And basically the fish won't bite on it anymore. Namely, when you do it this way, freezing it, yes, it will lose some of its properties. It will probably become more humid. It will become heavy. The smell and aroma will not be as rich, but it will still remain workable and more suitable for the next fishing trip than if you try to dry it out. For those interested, the link to all the gear will be in the description below this video. I've been fishing with a rod for a long time. The Flagman S-Canal feeder is a budget rod for a small price with a good action up to 80 grams. I really like it. It also has a good, interesting reel for it. 5,000 river. Well, I have a thin line, 0.12. The breaking strength is 5.5 kilo. Let's imagine that we've made a cast, but there are no bites. What can we do to make the fish bite? There are some very simple ways to manipulate. This is a drag along the bottom and a lift of the feeder. I've talked about them multiple times in my fishing videos. We're fishing, you all know that, right? Yes, friends. Well, for those who don't know, let's repeat it and I'll explain it to you once more. Let's imagine that we've just made a cast to our fishing spot. This is a simple cast that I usually make. It's sharp, really good. By the way, for those who don't know how to make such casts, you can check the hint above. I made a separate video for you where I talked about the top 5 feeder casts for beginners. Well, now let's talk about how to lure the fish if it's not biting. To attract the fish that are at the fishing spot but don't want to bite, there's a simple way. This is the method of dragging the feeder. The thing is, when we cast to the bottom, the feeder is lying there, and nearby there's a leader lying somewhere. The fish might be circling right here and just not seeing our bait. Well, who knows? Maybe it's hiding behind a little shell, a twig, or something else. We make a careful drag along the bottom, which shifts the feeder and pulls the bait along. The leader lies further. The feeder is dragged, and the bait makes a small movement. And the fish loves all sorts of movements from worms and various insects along the bottom. So that immediately provokes a bite. When the bait is lying still, it doesn't always get bites. So it has been lying there for, let's say, 2 or 3 minutes and there's no bite. We make a pull and our bait goes hop, moving a little. So yes, along the bottom. And the most active fish see this and immediately start biting. I assure you, if you do this, just look at the results. The fish will either bite right after the drag or in about 10-15 seconds. To make a drag, it's enough to make a full turn or half a turn of our reel. Here is our feeder rod, so to speak, in a ready state. We're waiting for a bite, and we have a straight line of the line. We make half a turn of the reel, it tightens up, and then it loosens. That way we understand that after the feeder has loosened up, we had a tension, and then it loosened up, which means the feeder was dragged. The drag has already been done. You shouldn't make a long drag. If you make a very long drag, you'll pull the bait away from the feeding spot. Here, for example, is your feeding spot. You turn it once, twice, and the bait just drifts away. And your feeder, it moved a meter along the bottom, and the fish got scared. This didn't attract it. On the contrary, it just pushed it away from that spot. That's why the drag should be short. Well, usually yes. So, with one cast, I make one drag at most. 2, meaning I cast. And if there's a bite, great. If not, then no bite. Then I wait for a minute, 2 to 3, depending on the interval for recasting. If there hasn't been a bite in 2 to 3 minutes, actually I do a light drag along the bottom before every recast, meaning before I pull the rod out and just recast it. I always take and make a drag, friends. This is already a system I've developed. So for example, if I want to recast and there's no bite, I take a moment to make a light pull along the bottom. I sat there for another 30 seconds. If nothing bites at all, then I just pull out the rod and that's it. And we recast everything from the beginning. We ask the fish to come. The next hack or tip or even a mistake that beginners often make, which I myself have done many times before. This, friends, is the hook set. How? We do it, what's right and what's not. Look, very often when we have a bite, what do? We sharply set the hook with the feeder rod and start reeling in. That's not quite right. It's actually better to do it a little differently. We have, for example, a feeder bite. We take the rod and set the hook on the fish. You shouldn't do it sharply because the length of the line, the arc, doesn't interfere with hooking it at all. We don't need to set the hook sharply. It's already on the hook if it's biting well. So we take the rod, set the hook on the fish, and lift the rod a bit like this at about a 45-degree angle, while understanding whether we have someone on the hook. And only then, when the rod is already above our heads, we start reeling in. A common mistake among beginners, including myself in the past, was how to do it. So what we do is, for example, we have the rod lying here and we get a bite. What are we doing? We just set the hook and immediately start reeling in, like this, frantically. That's not quite right. I'll show it again. We take it, make a hook like this, and just lead with the rod. We lead because it's up to here. And then we just start reeling it in. Why is it necessary to do it this way? Friends, the fact is that very often the same thing happens at the moment of hooking, at the moment of exhaustion. This sharp one, some small overlap of the Verschinker or something else. And you, first of all, have to feel, is there a fish on the hook? How much intensity can you afford? Reel in the spool? Because let's say, if we don't have a fish on the hook, we can just take it and spin it. Very, very quickly, so to speak, to deliver the feeder here faster, replant it and throw it there. And if there is a fish there, we will spin it more smoothly and understand what size it is. If it is large, we will work with the friction clutch slowly. Right. So this first moment allows us to understand if there's a fish there, whether it's resisting, thrashing around, if we can feel any vibrations, and what size it is. Also, besides dragging along the bottom, there is a simple way to lightly toss the bait. One of the subscribers recommended it to me, guys. So, what manipulation are we doing? We don't do the winding, as I told you earlier, lightly, but we just take it. So, we lift the rod slightly, lower it, and then we start reeling in the spool. I like this method of exciting the fish less than the first one, because during the first one we can directly control the quiver tip. And what we do, every manipulation, is like this. Here is a light winding, a light reel, and we see how the quiver tip behaves. When we do it smoothly, it gently bends away and then smoothly comes back, getting into a working state. If, however, friends, we immediately get a bite at this moment, which happens very often, we see changes, that is, it only bends. For example, it goes back and then there's a bite right away, the fish takes it on the fly. And when we do this kind of toss, using the tossing method, we can't immediately tell. I mean, when we've already reeled in, then we understand whether it bit or not. So I would recommend the first method, but you should know and try both. Now I'll briefly tell you about the shock leader, what it is, how to use it, how to tie it, and what it's for. Let's imagine a situation, so we have a rod like mine up to 80 grams, right? But we're fishing in very harsh conditions. And the ledge, which we need to drag through. To catch bream, it's all covered in shells, overgrown. The thing is, we use a thin line because it's delicate, it casts well, and it gets caught in the weeds less. With a thin line, we can see every bite. So what should we do to prevent it from fraying and to avoid breaking off every time? That's why, guys, we have a shock leader. This is the first reason why it's used. Our line, where we tie our feeder, then the leader goes the tackle. And the shock leader, it's just a piece of either thick line or a piece of thick braid that we tie to our main line. Here is our feeder line. Next, the feeder will go Here we tie either a thick line or, as a rule, this is done with a thick braid, the diameter of which is several times thicker than your main line. The length of this piece of line that we tie, which is several times thicker than our main line, which is spooled on the reel. As a rule, it's equal to 2 lengths of our rod, or 2.5. Why is that, guys? I'm explaining that at the moment of casting, the section of the line that gets loaded is the one that goes from the feeder all the way up the rod to the reel. At the moment of casting, the most loaded section of the cord is the one that goes to the reel. It's the most effective for us, and it takes on all the load during the cast, all the strain. The shock leader takes the load, but our main cord does not. So we can put more power into it without worrying that something will break off. This thick line also takes on all the load when we're pulling it over those nasty ledges. On the shell, it doesn't get frayed, we can pull it through anywhere. Even on the toughest ledges, this is exactly the process that happens when we start reeling in. We're reeling in and the bait just drags along the bottom. And we're pulling it up onto the slope. It's all covered in shell, right? She's all covered in barnacles and angry. Rough doesn't mean it's yelling at us, but rough in the sense that it's full of shells and cuts the lines and leader. That's why they use a thick line, right here. As you already understood, guys, a thin line just gets worn out on that shell and we end up leaving all our gear there. But we can pull out the thick one. You will immediately say and ask, Seryoga, damn. So wouldn't it be easier to just take it easy, wend a good thick line onto the entire reel and go fishing? So why come up with all this shock, leader, or something else, by the way? You will ask now. How to tie it? With what knot, friends? The truth, I told you. There was a separate video. You can also watch it in the hint or in the description. Under this video, I'll tell you that I tie everything with a figure-8 knot or a double figure-8 knot, and it holds perfectly without any issues. And so on and so forth, and the leader's shock, and everything else. So guys, when we use a shock leader instead of the main thick line, why is that necessary? When we cast, we have a cord coming out. When it is tightly wound on the entire reel, and it is thin, it is much lighter. We can cast accurately. We don't get as much grass caught, and our rod doesn't react as much to the waves because the line itself is thin, and it's always more comfortable to fish with a thin line. You can see the bites better, they're clearer, it goes through better, the cast is better, I'm telling you. So there are a lot of advantages. And when the line is thick, we don't feel it as much, we don't see it as clearly, there's more resistance, and it becomes harder for us to cast, right? But the conditions are a bit different. Not so delicately. Specifically, when the piece of line is the length of 2 rods, that is, here is the level of the drop, our shock leader has passed through the rod. And the main thing is that the shock leader, when you cast, has the shock leader go down here, the knot, and a little, at least half a meter, goes into the reel, so that all the load goes away. Specifically on this edge of the line, so that you don't cast over the knot in any way, because it will break off. And tie the shock leader with any knot so that it goes in for a few turns here, then nothing will break, everything will be great. So I recommend fishing with a shock leader on steep drops, or if you need to cast well, let's say the distance to the spot is about 50 meters. You might say that any rod with a 100-gram test can cast that distance, right? If you do it well, or 120 grams, if you do it right. Now imagine there's a steep drop there, and there's bream, and there's a headwind. With any feeder, even a heavy one, you won't be able to cast that far on a thick line. The line will be heavy, and it will be hard for it to come off the reel, and you won't reach it. But when you use a shock leader, if you make a good cast with the rod, just perfectly, you take it here, and then like a pendulum, you cast it, and then you just work with your left hand, holding it and putting in effort, and the line will come out easily. If it's on a thin line, at some point the line might give slack and break. But a thick line will show you like this and say, I can handle it. Me? Here's a little life hack that everyone uses. I don't know why it should be second nature, friends. At the moment when we make a cast, especially important when we're reeling in a fish, you should raise your hands up. You need to lift your hands up and with your arms extended, reel in your rod for sure. Why is this necessary? Now I'll tell you. Why do we need to raise our hands? Let's imagine that this is the drop-off. That's exactly how it looks. This whole slope where I'm walking is the riverbed. This is where we fish. Either here on the drop-off or we fish right here in the channel. And the task of our feeder is to come up from here to the shallow water to our fishing spot. The feeder comes up from here and swims like this. It's swimming, and we're turning the relief. Of course, it's not even there are different irregularities and everything else. That's why, guys, when we raise our hands up like this and we work with our arms, turning everything up, we effectively extend the rod by a whole piece of our arm, right? By a whole meter, you could say it becomes longer. With a length of 360, it becomes 460. That's right. A huge rod is already up there, and the feeder is lifted higher, so you'll get snagged less. If it's a short rod, we're going to snag all these things, of course. They also say there are feeders with wings which are used very often. Fishermen, so that it rises faster in the first half meter. So when you make a sharp lift and reel in, yes, it goes faster. This area is being passed through. Yes, that's true as well. But I would recommend that you develop the habit of raising your hands up like this during the strike, which effectively extends the rod. Yes, it is energy consuming. You will be a little overexerted during fishing. Well, what can you do? Feeder fishing is not like lying on the couch at home. It requires some manipulations which we are explaining to you right now. I don't know if you've noticed that some feeder anglers sometimes dip the tip of their rod into the water. They dip the very tip of the quiver tip into the water, and that's how they watch for bites when it's slightly submerged. Now I'll tell you why they do that. The thing is, when we have strong wind and high waves, sometimes the rods are lowered under the wave, just like this, down, and they watch for bites right at the very edge of the quiver tip. When we have a freeze, and the water temperature is about, let's say, +3, +4, +5 degrees, but here it's -2, -3, the rings freeze over, and then they lower them just like that. The water, the quiver tip, you can't always do that. Only those who know how to do it do that. I don't really practice that. I don't fish in the frost, guys. And right now it's actually summer and warm. Yes, it will be soon. So if there's a really big wave, you can try doing it that way. But if the wave is high and has crests, this won't work. If the wave is strong, the wind is blowing short. Yes, a section of the river, let's say, a small one. That's actually pretty good. You can see all the bites on the quiver tip, and all those parasitic vibrations are released. Your line is completely underwater, both here and in the middle, and further along. And he doesn't react to the wave in the same way. It doesn't float along with it like that, and the parasitic vibrations of the feeder just don't happen. How to position the rods? Some people set them up like this, pointing upwards. So we see that the quiver tip at the very top is looking up at the sky. Not straight in front of you, but up to the sky. When do they put it this way? And why? When is it beneficial to do this? That's how you set up the feeder when fishing in a current. When the river is quite narrow, it can also be wide, and we have a strong current, so that the cord, the area of the cord and the length of the cord that enters the water, it should be as short as possible when it comes into contact with it. To reduce parasitic vibrations, to minimize the bending of the arc, and to carry less and get caught on all sorts of weeds. When this happens, especially in the summer during hot weather, people set up their rods like this, on rivers with a current. If we have a stagnant body of water, then it makes no difference. How you put it, it can be even worse because the wind will shake the top more often than you put it. The rods, for example, like this, closer to the water, lower down. Of course, I enjoy fishing more. Like this, when the rods are spread out, it's placed on my knee so I can see every bite and I react immediately, hop, hop, and that's it. But there were times when I was fishing on fast-flowing rivers with a strong current and I just set the rod up like this. Yes, there was its advantage. When the bite is on, as they say, it's just okay. This is how I often do it, and I want to share it with you. Even when the bite is good, no matter what, I cast the rod and I don't immediately rest it on the rod holder, not at all. I make the cast and it goes to the clip just as it should, we throw it. I immediately rest the rod on my knee, so my rods are right there on my leg. So why do I do it this way? While our rod goes to the stand, or goes somewhere else, we will make unnecessary manipulations. There are often bites of attacks, and when the rods are positioned like this, my friends, you can see and feel everything right away. Any touches, there it is transmitted to us like a spin. If the form is good, vibrations come straight here, knocks, sounds, and you immediately feel it, right in your foot. Let's say you got distracted, 20-30 seconds passed before there were no bites. You got distracted, looked at your friend there, climbed somewhere, you can feel a bite right here. That's why it's much more convenient to work this way. I really recommend you do it. And also, during those pauses, while casting, if you need to turn away, you can place your finger just like this. Look, we take our index finger and lay it down like this, right here on the butt of the rod, and you can still hear the bites. Right here on the butt, you can hear the bites, just the same. Do you have the opportunity for professionalism? We place it right here because it slightly compensates for any vibrations from the bite. You could say, this polyurethane, yes, the foam plastic that we have, Eva pen. Then here we have a cork, and here to the blank we just hop, put it down and feel a bite. Yes, it's not a pike. Yes, it's not a predator when we have powerful bites. But believe me, when the bream hits on the fly, like in spring, right now it's feeding time, those sharp bites are transmitted directly into the rod. And vibrations? You can feel it with your fingers. Therefore, you can freely move left and right, twist your face with your hooks, and not miss a bite, and eat the fish, and go fishing. I hope you found these tips or life hacks helpful. How to say if you liked it, if you learned something new, guys, then please give this video a like. And for those who aren't subscribed, please subscribe to my channel. I wish you all good fishing, peace and kindness. May you have no tails and no scales, and may you always have bites.